In this video, I'm going to be sharing with you the signs that you have a deep mother wound, and I'm going to share exactly how it is showing up in your life. So make sure you stick around for the entire of the video because we're going to go deep, we're going to get juicy, so let's dive straight in. Hello everyone, my name is Christina and I am a spiritual guide helping people heal their past and embody their most highest self. So the mother wound is actually quite complex compared to the father wound. The mother wound, I think, can be quite sneaky unless it's totally obvious that you were abused as a child or that you had a really narcissistic mother and you know your relationship is not all that it should be. It's very dysfunctional relationship. So if you haven't seen my father wound video yet, go check out that first and then come straight back to this one, or you can just watch it straight after this one if you wish. The reason why the mother wound is so complex is because the mother is our first ever relationship. Even before we are born, we have a relationship with our mother, how she responded to you inside of her womb. And when you were in her womb, how she formed an attachment to you, how she took care of her own body also plays an important role. The first relationship we have is with our mother. That's why the wounding can be very complex and deep, and then it can play out in our future relationships if we have a wound and maybe we're not aware of it. So often we think that the daddy wound is the big one, the daddy issues. I know I had the father wound and then I've dealt with that. I'm healing that still, and healing is a non-linear journey. So we are constantly always ever evolving and in our evolution of healing. So it's very obvious with the dad because it's usually the abandonment. Because the mother is our first relationship, this is how we form our attachments, and when we form attachments is how we are going to show up in the world in our relationships. So it can get very complex because it's all to do with attunement and how attuned your mother was to you from the moment you were born. Because when a baby is born into the world, it has no understanding of whether this is going to be safe or not, and the baby comes into the world in survival mode because the baby is born with all these survival reflexes, like the rooting reflex, which is where the baby moves its face in search for the nipple, for the breast, or if it feels like it's going to fall or it's startled, the baby will startle. And these are all reflexes because the baby wants to survive. And so this means the mother and also the father, but mainly the mother, is the primary person in the beginning, particularly if you're breastfeeding, to meet the needs of the baby so the baby can survive, so the baby feels safe. And often we are born into a world that is immediately felt unsafe because in the hospital environment, a baby is taken out from either, if it's a C-section, taken out that way, or if it's a traumatic birth, essentially, the baby is rubbed down, bright lights everywhere, very shocked into this earthly plane, and then all of a sudden that instills fear and the baby begins to feel unsafe already. So this means the baby and the child needs to form a deep, secure attachment to the mother. And when that doesn't happen, the baby or the child growing up, as the child begins to blossom and develop, forms maybe an anxious attachment style or an avoidant attachment style. And we can chop and change between different attachment styles, but ultimately the mother wound is when a child's needs weren't met and the mother was not attuned to the baby. And attunement is literally picking up on their cues, their needs, their wants, their desires, and being highly attuned to when the baby may be hungry, beginning to pick up on all these cues of if a baby is feeling distressed, or a child. It's not just a baby, it's being very attuned to that. And if a baby or a child doesn't feel that, it's going to feel like, well, I'm not good enough, I'm not having my needs met by this mother figure, my ultimate nurturing, caring mother that is supposed to meet my needs to help me feel secure and safe in the world. So they're going to internalize that their external environment, which is the mother, is telling them that it's not safe. And often we have narcissistic mothers. My own mother was quite narcissistic. My mum had kind of no emotional control over herself. She would just snap instantly. It was very much like walking on eggshells, and this can cause anxious attachment styles when 1 minute the mother would be fine and the next minute the mother would just snap. And for a child, that means it's like walking on eggshells, and it become that in a state of flight, or freeze or fawn, because you are always in a state of response, like there's a big elephant about to charge at you constantly. You don't know when it's going to snap, when your mother is going to snap. And it was like that for me constantly, because if you caught my mother in a bad day, you had to get out of her fucking way, because she would just wallop you one. So that means my mother wasn't meeting my needs. She wasn't emotionally available. She had no emotional control over herself. And then she would blame and project all her emotions onto me and my siblings, because everything was our fault, rather than taking responsibility and controlling her own emotions. So often the signs that we have a mother wound is that we become people pleasers, we become codependent. That's what can happen, because often if a child's needs are not met and they receive no validation from the mother, no nurturing, they are highly criticized by the mother, then they change how they are as a person. They dim their light, because children are very naturally bright lighted. They are a more source creation. So the child dims their light in order to fit in and please the parent, because that's how they're getting their needs met. If I act this certain way, then I will get my needs met. If I'm quiet, if I dim my light, if I do as I'm told, then I will get my needs met, because the parent will be happy. So often the signs of a deep mother wound is we are constantly people pleasing, and that is actually still a form of manipulation, because we are trying to get our own needs met. It's say, if I do this for you, if I please you, then I get my own needs met. I get what I want out of the situation. Because often we're holding on to that inner child wound of the invalidation. So we take that into our adult life and become people pleasers, and then we can end up not speaking our own truths, not coming from authenticity, and just meeting everybody else's needs because we had to meet our mother's needs to make her happy, because we weren't good enough. So but the result of the people pleaser is that we have lack of boundaries. We keep giving and giving and giving, because ultimately we just want our own needs met. So it's not really our fault, but it's about taking ownership of that wound, of that people pleaser, because that is the fawning response. When we are constantly in that stress response, it means we are fawning all the time, and that means we are putting a front on. We are not being truthful to ourselves about our boundaries, about our needs. So we try and manipulate the people around us, give them what they want, so then we feel like we are whole and complete and we are getting our needs met. So that is one of the signs that we have a deep mother wound, is the people pleaser. And then that can lead into codependency relationships. If you're feeling like you're codependent on somebody else because they meet your needs, it's kind of like a trauma bond rather than a deep and meaningful connection. It means you have this mother wound of when you were a child that you didn't have your own needs met. So you're expecting this partner in this relationship to meet your needs constantly and give you the validation all the time, and you're highly dependent on that person because you're stuck in the trauma. You're operating from this trauma response, and all it takes is doing that inner work and seeing it and shining the light of awareness onto it. So another sign that you have mummy issues is that you are a bit of a perfectionist. I know I can be like this. If you were constantly criticized by your mother and you had to behave a certain way to feel accepted, then you would put on kind of some high expectation for yourself all the time as a child and into your current life, because that's the only way you got the validation, you got your needs met. So you constantly put pressure on yourself to get things right, set the bar way too high for yourself, and you're never going to be able to achieve it. And I just want to remind you here that actually there's no such thing as perfection. Nobody is perfect. You are already whole and complete and worthy just as you are right now. You don't need to do X, Y, and Z to meet some high standard that you've set for yourself because your mummy told you that if you did this and this and this, then she would be proud of you, that she would give you the validation, meet your needs to feel like you were safe and secure. And perfectionism will just set you up to fail, because no matter how good you do something, it will never be good enough in your own eyes. And it's you always trying to do something good enough because then maybe you'd get the approval of your mum. Let me know in the comments below if you think there are any more signs, and I will see you on the next video. Much love.